Hi, everyone. So I have the pleasure of moderating this panel today. It's really lovely to be here and for a second time be talking about art and tech at such a at an auction house. Last year we had the discussion about blockchain, and it was really great to go so deep into it. And with AI, what's even more exciting is that we can bring in people from such different areas of the art world, including technology companies and museums on stage today. So it's very exciting. I'm Bernadine Brocker. I'm the CEO of Vastari. And before we start, I just wanted to ask one question, and it's a bit interactive so that we all wake up again as well. How many of you have been to a museum in the last year? Yeah, everybody? Okay. How many of you visited a website before going to the museum? How many of you visited a website after going to the museum, as a result of going to the museum? How many of you visited a digital museum? Okay, yeah, it's kind of what we expected, right? Slightly less every time. So that's kind of the angle that we're going to be talking about. And each of our speakers is going to introduce themselves today. And then we will start a complete discussion. So first up, it's Brendan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Ciacco. I'm so excited to be here and to partake in this conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called QZM that works with hundreds of museums, helping them succeed in this digital age. I started designing and developing technology when I was 11 years old, broke into the music industry and was working with Mick Jagger and Katy Perry, and then asked myself, what's a sexier, more lucrative sector? And of course, the answer was obvious. It was museums. And so, no, kidding aside, it was an area of great passion of mine, and I saw how painful and frustrating a lot of the tools were as museums kind of embark on this journey to become more digital and technologically savvy. So we've worked with hundreds of institutions, and from the earliest days of the company, being a company based in Boston, where you throw a rock and you hit Eric Brynjolfsson at MIT, a foremost thinker in the areas of AI, started to think, well, how can these driving forces change the way museums operate, help them become more efficient? And I started to catalog a lot of my ideas and put them online in what became one of the first written pieces about the impacts that AI would have on the museum sector. So jumping into some of my slides, one of the examples we looked to as soon as the earliest cloud machine vision APIs became available was, well, how accurate is an untrained model in looking at a painting? So this is a Canaletto from the Getty's collection of the Grand Canal in Venice. And so without any technical savvy, throwing together in about a minute, if I can throw a command to the cloud and ask it what it sees in this image, how accurate is it going to be? And very clearly, the responses were pretty interesting. Watercraft rowing, gondola painting. And this was in the earliest days, 3 years ago or so. Where the rate at which we're evolving today is a completely different picture, especially with self-driving cars and other more sophisticated terms. So even looking to the subject detection, how accurate was it? Yes, in fact, that is a gondola. And then moving even forward to semantic image segmentation, where you're able to classify the different instances in the images, kind of paints you a picture of what's to come, where museums will be able to identify, classify, and make their works more accessible by having them truly paired with great metadata that would just be impossible to do at the largest scale. So those are some of the things that just in touching the surface, we became very inspired by, and it's so great that Christie's is hosting this conversation with some incredible people in the field, practitioners and thinkers. So thank you.
So hi, everyone. My name is Maria Kessler, but there you go. That's who I am. I'm at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I'm in charge of digital partnerships. I don't have a typical art background. My background is mainly in licensing and in stock photography. So I know a lot about rights and permissions, and that's where I gained most of my career background. And then just prior to coming to the Met, I actually was exploring and trying to educate photographers on blockchain. So I've always had this kind of geeky background. And I find myself at the Met in charge of a really wonderful, wonderful attribute. The Met opened its doors to open access in 2017, in February of 2017. And so we have one of the largest open access programs of any cultural institution. What that open access data set is, it's 470,000 art objects with data behind them, over 200,000 distinct images for those art objects, and then we have multiples of those images as well. So we have a very rich data set, and then in addition to that, we added a subject keyword data set to that just in February. What this has allowed us to do is really experiment with machine learning, with artificial intelligence. We've done a couple of experimentations. We worked with Microsoft and M.I.T. We had a hackathon, and the whole goal of the hackathon was really, how do we make more connections? How do we use our API and AI technologies to really discover how people can connect to art in new and different ways? And so that resulted in a number of prototypes. We displayed them at the Met in a great party. They were as diverse as having a GANs prototype that explored the in-between between two different art objects, and something as simple as artwork of the day. After that, we did another exploration of what AI could do with both visual recognition and cognitive recognition in a proof of concept search tool. We just presented that at the Microsoft Build conference. And then in the meantime, we've been doing more exploration, and we've been working with some academics and researchers. They actually happened to work at Google, and they were part of the Kaggle conference, and that was exploring fine-grained attribute categorization, again, using our extremely large data set to really hone in on culture in what their challenge was. And I just have these are images from our presentation of our AI prototypes. The one on the right is the GANs in progress, and that was moving throughout the evening. The image on the left is a storyteller prototype where we spoke into a microphone, and images of our artworks were presented behind us. So it was telling a story, and then we could use that story to move throughout the museum as well.
Thank you. I'm Simon Delacroix. I'm the US lead for Google Arts and Culture in the US. And to present you a little bit about what we do in a few sentences, I put on this slide our mission, which is to build technologies to make the world's culture accessible to anyone, anywhere. And we're not doing this alone. We're doing this with partners from the cultural ecosystem, from museum. And for the anecdote, it started 8 years ago with a few set of partners, including the Met. In New York, there was the MoMA, 2 European partners included L'Ermitage, Tate, or Palais of Versailles. So few museums that saw the opportunity to come together and to see with us what it could mean to develop new technologies together between the tech company and the museum world. And if you fast forward 8 years, you can see the results on our app. We've been a platform and an app that today has over 2,000 partners from more than 80 countries, displaying more than 6 million artifacts, artworks, and a lot of stories that are curated by all these experts. So this is a little bit of the journey, and behind the scene, you have all these years of experimentation with these teams, with the partners, with different teams at Google. An important team on our side is the lab at Google Arts and Culture based in Paris, and I'll show in a few seconds the few of their work. Other teams include artists and machine intelligence that will be speaking today with Kenrick and Eva. Later on, you'll hear more about their projects. And what we're trying to do is always to bring together different partners from the cultural world and to see how we can solve more challenges and keep experimenting. So that was my slide in case we needed to talk about something else than AI, because this is actually using AR, so the possibility of your phone to project in your environment a gallery. And I'm using it now because Bernardine asked in the introduction who has ever visited an online museum or gallery. That's a good example of how using the Art and Culture app you can project in your surrounding a little pocket gallery and dive into it, and in this case, have a look at the 36 Vermeers gathered for the first time in AR, in virtual reality. So allowing you to discover something that would not be otherwise physically possible.
And just for people that might not be able to see on your image, that on the table next to the fruit is actually a museum.
The museum and the different rooms that have been built in collaborations, again, with all partners participating.
So you're basically taking the museum home?
Correctly, yeah.
Okay.
So that's an example that is not using AI. We've also, obviously, for the past 2 to 3 years, worked with a lot of different partners and teams to develop a couple of experiments. We keep calling them experiments because we think that's what they are. And we've been basically following 3 main trends or categories. The first one is to try and work with the museum to see how we can help solve a problem brought by curators. In this example, and what you see here, is the challenge that the MoMA was facing, having 30,000 pictures from past exhibitions and no metadata associated to it. So they had no idea of how to explore them and understand what was composing all these pictures and all these past exhibitions. So they were sitting with a collection of 60,000 artworks and trying to understand how they've been used in the past by their different curators from the 30s. Well, using visual recognition, we've been able to analyze all the pictures from these past exhibitions and to detect the artworks and to link them back to the main artwork it belongs to. So you see here the shots of the gallery, how the machine algorithm is able to detect an artwork. And if you click actually on one artwork, then on the MoMA, thanks to this technology, you can scroll down and discover how it's been used through the time in different exhibitions to better understand, how it has been used by curators.
Is this live on the MoMA website already?
Correct, yeah. So this is an experiment, but readily usable and available on a partner's website. The other example and other trend that we're following is how can you help users access to more art and play with art and maybe do something a bit more lively or fun. I don't know if you heard about the art selfie. It got pretty viral over a year and a half ago. And the idea was simple. Can you use the selfie that, for the best or the worst, everybody's using on a daily basis, and use that to bridge and bring back people to discover more art? And so using the Google Arts and Culture app, you can take a selfie, and it will match you to one of the portraits in your collection. And it's been fantastic to see the people's reaction. There's actually a lady that recognizes herself in a painting and found that it was an ancestor. So we've been able to see those amazing stories coming up. And as you can see, we've had over 100 million selfies taken since the launch of the artwork. So it shows also how a simple tool like that can help facilitate the access and discoverability of art. The last slide. So the last project I wanted to mention doesn't have a slide, so I'll just give you that. But I'll just say a few words about it. It's how we can also help artists in the process of creating a new artworks. And one of the collaborations I wanted to mention, there are others on our platform, is how we've worked with S. Devlin and Rose Goodwin in helping S. Devlin, so the famous stage designer, creating an experiment where you can input one word, and the algorithm that has been trained on 19th century British poetry will create a poem using your word and send you poetry. And the beauty is how it's both personal, because you see how your word echoes with a style of poetry, but then it can also become a performance and something that you can set up at an event, and then it's collective because you can write an entire poem with input from different users and create a collective experience like that. And that has also been made possible by machine learning and these collaborations that we've been doing. So these are just few examples that we've been working on with the different teams at Arts and Culture.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Pereira. I'm the director at New Inc., which is the incubator founded by the New Museum here in New York in 2013. I was asked to make just one slide, so here's my one slide.
Yeah, you kept to the brief.
New Inc. is an incubator for people working at the intersection of art, design, and technology. For the past 5 years, we've supported about 100 members each year through an annual program. Today, I'm going to share just some of the work we work with in our museum technology track, which is underwritten by the M.I.T Foundation. So out of our 100 members, we have about a dozen of them who are focused on designing new technology for museums. The idea of this work that we're now 2 years in, we have another year ahead of us, is focusing on accessible technology. So not all of us have partners like Google Arts and Culture or the Met Museum. And so we're trying to figure out for small and mid-sized museums with limited budgets, limited resources, sometimes their technology is a projector, no joke. How can we design things that any museum can use, knowing that, as one of the speakers earlier said, this is one of the sort of great wealth of culture is art. So how do we make that more accessible? So there's 3 ways that teams at New Inc. are using AI to do this, specifically in our museum technology track. And one way they're not, but they'd really like to be, but no museum has ever asked them. So I'm going to throw that one out there too. So the first way is, really kind of underground, behind the scenes, the nuts and bolts. Brendan earlier had a slide up with a lot of sort of gobbledygook code on the screen. There's teams at New Inc. who are making sure that museums, their database of art, their art collections, can talk to websites, to third-party tools, to researchers, so that people can access and make use of their collections. That is, AI is impossible without a data set to talk to, that metadata, those tags that we spoke about earlier. So that's one, and that's a very important thing. In fact, the Barnes collection, which we saw on the screen, that was powered in part by a New Inc. Team, Michael Walter Studio. So that's one way. The second way is discovery and engagement. This is, I would say, probably the most popular way that the teams at New Inc. are really interested in exploring museum technology. And this means, again, using the Barnes collection example or some of the stuff we saw with the Met, how are we then displaying, sharing, or even just the MoMA stuff we saw, and enabling visitors, art lovers, art historians, researchers, curators to access this data and make sense of it and discover new things. What is particularly interesting about this work, as far as it's happening at New Inc., is and I'm sure you've heard over the course of the morning so far, is it's brand new. So as people are writing algorithms to decide this vase looks like this vase, they're constantly tweaking the sort of the algorithm that informs, look for reds, look for curves, look for straight lines, look for background images, look for flowers, look for people, look for hats. And so you might write an algorithm that shows you 2 vases that kind of look like each other, and then tweak it, and then those 2 vases will never be shown together again. So this is the kind of work that our members are trying to figure out. How do they create? How do they use AI to make the best possible discovery? But I would say, unpacking even that, what does best mean? What are people looking for? Are we looking just for meta tags, or are we looking for visual cues, or are we looking for both? So that's the second way. It's really around discovery and engagement. And that could be on web, or using tools like AR, or in the gallery, using visual interfaces or even gestural interfaces. One of our members, Richard Tay from Studio The Green Isle, actually did some fun experiments with his students in the Met collection last year, imagining sort of visual interfaces that visualized the entire Met collection, which was really cool. The third way is around accessibility. So one of the problems we've encountered as we've done this research is that museums largely do not understand who their audience is. They do not know who's walking in their door. They don't know who's going to their website before or after the visit. They don't know what people want, are curious for, are hungry to learn more about, what will bring them back. So our members are figuring out how do we design technology and products using AI that will help people learn not just at a surface level who their visitors are, but also what they want and what is engaging for them. So that, I would say, interestingly, that's sort of not the thing that museums lead with. That's sort of what we've unpacked through asking questions and digging. And then, so the fourth thing that no museum has ever asked for, but I've literally had 3 different artists pitch us on, is understanding then, once your visitors are in the gallery, what are they doing in the gallery? What painting are they selfieing in front of most of the time? Like what gets the 500 selfie pics in front of it? They're also interested in tracking movements and how people are moving around the gallery. They're also interested in doing things like understanding, using heat maps and infrared sensors to understand what paintings get people excited. They think, and again, no museum has ever said this to me, no curator has ever said this to me, but they believe that curators would be really interested to discover that, you know, that painting got everyone all hot and bothered. So I think, and that is obviously a potential. The technology exists. Again, it's just not a question museums are asking. And I think a big part of our Newing program is to shape new questions.
That's a really great link into the first question I wanted to ask you about. Museums, we say that term, but actually it's a large organization, or sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, but many different people with different types of skill sets and different types of hopes for this technology. I think that a lot of the examples we see are from education departments, but you just alluded to it could potentially help curators. Mm-hmm. Have you seen differences in how that's done? You were talking about this.
Yeah, so my team had the opportunity to work on what was one of the first solely augmented reality-based museum exhibitions in the world in collaboration with the Perez Art Museum in Miami that opened at Art Basel several years ago. And what was really interesting about that project from an institutional or hierarchical perspective was that we initially learned that the idea of technology in the gallery, or the idea of technology as a new medium for art, was something that there was a lot of mixed feelings across the curatorial department, across the education department. But once this started to swing into full gear, it united people in a way that the museum hadn't seen in their history, and got people really excited from different perspectives. One, from the STEAM education perspective and introducing their community to something new. The curatorial being gung-ho about this being a new medium, but also an iterative form of art where the artists themselves could modify the work based on the reactions they were perceiving.
What was it exactly, this AR exhibition that you guys did?
Yeah, so there were no physical works whatsoever. It was a site-specific series of digital sculpture that were interactive and animated, exploring the subject of climate change and invasive species in Miami, which is a hot topic in that community. So it was called Invasive Species, and it ended up touching a lot of different points in the international media around its artistic integrity, its tech integrity. It was one of the first uses of Apple's AR kit in the cultural sector. So it kind of created a lot of new dialogues, but I think more importantly, got all of these different departments to be really excited about a new technology.
That's a success story, I guess, a happy story. Do we have some examples of how it's actually the opposite is true, maybe? That you were alluding earlier that the curators aren't really asking for it? Is it sometimes hard to, with these organizations, find the people to talk to?
It is. I think you're correct. A lot of times when we reach out to museums, we speak with education or interpretation departments. They seem to be the ones most hungry for these opportunities in technology. I do think, as we've already heard a few examples this morning from an art historical point of view where there's real value, we also know that a lot of times these data sets are constructed with art history in mind. But as far as who's asking for it, I don't necessarily think it's from a curatorial perspective.
But I would just say that it was really interesting to me that after we did our collaboration with Microsoft and MIT, the very first curatorial department that knocked on our door was our Islamic art, and we are pursuing something with them. And it's really because we're using AI to explore that new connection, and they really wanted to rejuvenate and do a deeper exploration and show people what they have to offer in this ancient world.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I remember early on in kind of my journey into the cultural sector, hearing from one of the great former museum directors, Max Anderson, that if you come to me with technology, my ears turn off, but if you come to me with attendance, buzz, and accessibility, I'm listening. So I think technologists have a habit, and probably a lot of us in this room have a habit of focusing too much on the minutia, too much on the technology, rather than the benefit to the public. And I think that is the equalizer when you're talking with curators, is what is your goal and how can we create something that helps you achieve it?
And actually, you were mentioning that your main mission is reach and accessibility and audiences.
Absolutely. No, I mean, we're really looking at AI as an exploration and making new connections. And really, how do we use AI to really look for new narratives and really explore those new narratives within the 5,000 years of history that we cover?
Narratives is an interesting word, because I think that also there is a certain type of academic possession of narratives that exists today, that then when you're using machine learning and artificial intelligence, it might be giving away a little bit of that power of the narrative. Similarly, if you're working with an external party like Museum or Google, you might be giving away a bit of that power. Do you think that there's a bit of a power struggle there between what's internal versus external? And how do you bring those together?
I'll take it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've never felt a power struggle. I've felt a lot of curiosity for the technology, again, trying to really understand what it means, and sometimes a lot of fear about what it really is. So sometimes it's about, am I going to lose indeed the prerogative I have, or what will actually, what will the algorithm actually do, and how is it trained? Like, or will it do my job in the end? But not at all. It's all, you know, bringing together the experts, engineers, different curators, but sometimes also someone from the education departments or communication. I think all working together to understand the different aspects of a technology and what it can serve, and by doing so, building the shaping and especially speaking about AI, the right tool for the right need, because there's this big idea that AI can just create a result by itself, but no, you need to program it, you need to have an intention, there are a lot of work put behind an experiment that is powered by AI, and I think that's where the power lies. And at Google, for example, with Google Arts and Culture, we bring the technological expertise, but we don't bring the cultural expertise, and we'll always need the curators in the mix, and that's how you get a good experiments and a good.
Yeah, and I would just say, from the Met's perspective, we're really taking a very proactive approach. AI is all around us already. And by taking that proactive approach, we're not only experimenting with what AI can do to connect us to new audiences and global audiences and to discover those new narratives, but we're also making it possible for everyone globally to access what we have. We're partnering with Wikimedia Foundation and putting our open access collection on Wikidata as well.
Incredible.
That actually ties really nicely into another issue around control and narratives, is licensing and having control of the images and how they're used. The Met has made their images open. Some of the museums you work with might not have open access for their images. How do you handle that copyright issue when you're working with these big sets of data that maybe are not all licensed for usage in this way?
I'll give the startup answer, and it's that we're fully immersed in this age of permissionless innovation, and all of the most interesting experiments that are happening today are kind of these hacked together skunkwork projects that are just exploring if technology can have such an impact. But when you are working with a museum, all of that kind of steps to the side, because there are some serious, traditions and standards around the use of images. I think museums like the Met being on the forefront of open access, and others with APIs, and you're free to use our images, like over in Cleveland recently. There's a lot of incredible things that are happening because of that.
And what about in terms of innovation with New Ink? Do you sometimes also go into the museums, or do the museums come to you in order to think about innovative ideas?
Yeah, actually a big piece of our grant is about reaching the field. And so we very intentionally reach out to museums to start these conversations. And I think your question is germane, because a lot of times people are not necessarily interested in participating in this kind of work. And so I think sometimes our work is literally just to show up, talk about what we're up to, ask some pointed questions, think about open access, think about, point to projects like the Met, and really just help seed that ground and then walk away. We're not going to maybe do any actual work beyond that.
So almost helping people see the potential first.
Yeah, start to ask those questions, start to understand what's, because I think also there's an exclusionary zone. A lot of people think, oh, that's not for me. They do really think that it's for institutions with lots of resources, big collections, et cetera, et cetera. And so helping people, even if it's like a tiny one-person museum with, a localized collection of artwork from, that community, helping them understand how they can participate in sort of this global movement.
Yeah, because it does sound like a very big undertaking, but actually it's quite scalable.
Yeah, we're very interested in small data, actually. We talk about this a lot.
Really interesting. And do you think that in the future, so right now you have to do scientific training to be an art historian, to work in an art museum that is more in terms of art history. Is there going to be a future where you also need to learn how to use code and to be a data scientist in order to be working within museums?
The field is really looking at technical literacy right now and the importance that it has across all avenues and all the facets of museums. I don't think that one would need to know how to code, but I think that knowing how to code would make someone a better curator, a better conservator, a better director, to be frank with you. But it's this interesting flip from the scholarly to the audience, and something that has been kind of living in the back of my mind since I heard it 6 months ago is the idea that machine extracted vocabularies and terms could be more humanistic and more audience-centered than that of the scholar or the curator, and that kind of creates that power struggle that I think you're pointing to.
The machine learning algorithm can understand better how to describe an artwork for the audiences compared to the professionals.
Exactly, something that's more relevant or connected. So if you're looking at a still life of a bowl of oranges, the way in which a scholar might describe that versus the machine, they're two very different things.
So you're saying that the scholars are right to feel threatened and to feel that they should not?
If I can jump in here, because I have a very strong feeling about this, since the purpose of our program is specifically to design technology so that people don't need to know how to code. However, I do think there needs to be a degree of technological literacy.
Sure.
I think that machines are very good at seeing orange. Scholars are very good at understanding the context why that bowl of oranges was painted, and it's interesting, right? And so the scholars, to understand how the technology works and to be able to engage with it and then find that middle space of meaning making, I think that's where the real magic will happen. And so it's not either or, and that it's maybe not a power struggle, more like a collaboration.
Yeah, and actually that's completely true, because imagine the type of algorithms about art that would be made by pure engineers with no art historical background compared to if they were collaborating with people.
Self-destructing art piece.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I guess one thing that I realized is that we're here in a center of the art market. And so museums might be a little bit more advanced in terms of how they were looking at using their data, because they were looking at open access, looking at how to digitize their collections. They had big data because they have such big collections. What can the art market learn from what museums have done in terms of what has happened so far? Do you have any suggestions of, if you're a smaller gallery, if you're a larger gallery, how should you be looking at this technology, and what should you be thinking about?
I'm still struck by the last part of the conversation, and I would say to catalog or to capture the information while that piece is still part of the public, because we do have pieces that go into private collections and they're gone, they're lost to us for that period of time or for numbers of years. And so we've lost that history, we've lost that context, we've lost that information. And to capture that information so that it becomes part of our global knowledge, it becomes part of that accessible thing that's on Google Arts and Culture, or part of the Met's collection, or part of some other collection. I think that's really important.
That actually resonates so much, because when we started Vistari 7.5 years ago, a big part of it was about the fact that the art history is not told in its completeness if you're missing all of the information about the works that are still held in private hands. Completely true.
We have two teams at New Ink who are not focused on museums. They are focused more on the private market. One of which is a company called Collectors, and it's specifically about sort of I forget what the stat is, but the amount of art that's held in private storage that no one ever sees is obscene. And so their mission is to unleash that art, to really get it into their database and make it visible and accessible. And I think they certainly have a lot of ideas about how AI is going to play into this, and also thinking about blockchain and provenance, and making sure that artists who are related to the artwork are rewarded for their work. We have another team also, a company called Arternal, that's working with galleries it's basically like a CRM for galleries. Their concept of AI is using a lot of this sort of relational visual language, so understanding better how the buyers, the people who are buying from these galleries, what they're interested in, what they already own, what they've bought from the gallery, and then using AI to say, hey, you have this piece, these people bought one just like it in the last year, you should send them an email, and basically writing that email for them, or writing it for the art dealer so that they can then modify it and send it out. So really helping people make
efficiency within the processes.
Efficiency. It's making better matches.
We're talking about AI just about the collections, but actually you can use AI in your working processes as well, in how you send out emails more quickly, make sure that you have the mailing lists that are specialized to different people's interests.
Yes.
Yeah, like I recently learned that the Art Institute of Chicago, using an AI model and pattern recognition, was able to add several $1 million to their bottom line by understanding audience patterns, all sorts of things happening in their city, to make predictions essentially that help them operate more efficient. And it's interesting because those frankly are the least sexy yet most important things for the sustainability of these organizations. I think we're at this really interesting time where the museums shining in the technological lens is around their visual places, and so naturally machine vision and the experiments and the use cases are so visual in themselves that it's AI for good. It's something that we can all feel good about. It's something that it's easy to understand or explain. But then there are the business problems, and the business intelligence side around efficiency is that last area. So there are partnerships between like Blackbaud and Microsoft, Blackbaud being one of the leading CRMs and ticketing systems used in the cultural field, in the nonprofit space, and of course in museums, to help them find those insights to operate more effectively. And I think that's where there needs to be a little bit more attention right now, just given the urgency around sustainability, endowment. If you can't accept that evil, dark money, as we've all seen, museums saying, no, we can't accept that donation because of X, Y, and Z, then you need to build in efficiencies to fundraise more effectively, to retain your members, to engage your visitors, to attract new visitors. And I think that that's where AI has a really powerful position right now in the cultural space.
That makes a lot of sense. Are you doing that at the Met?
Well, I was going to use technology in a different way. So not necessarily for attendance or for how people are moving through the museum, but just when we were beginning our experimentations and collaboration using AI, someone came up to me and they said, "Oh, can you help me? Can AI help us catalog faster?" I'm like, of course, of course. But those are one of the problems. If we have nearly 2 million art objects, we don't have enough time or resources to do that in a very efficient way. Same thing with keywords. I mean, we added little over 1,000 term keyword set to our open access collection. We did that manually, and then we had to vet it. And then we're now putting it out there. We're saying, hey, experiment with us, because we want to generate more. We want to see what those keywords predict and whether or not they're highly relevant or not.
And then I guess going back to the concept of new audiences and broadening the audiences, do you think what is important in order to make sure that there's a diversity in the setting of those keywords, in the setting of the parameters? How do we make sure that it's not just white middle-class people at museums writing what is important? How do we make it more How do we make it different?
Well, I think we have to experiment. I mean, that may be one of the experimentations we'll do is gender bias with these keywords, et cetera. I don't know. I leave that up to some of the academic institutions we may be working with in the future. It is important. We understand that there's gender bias. I think we all understand that. And I think that's something we need to, how do we weight that? I'm not sure. There's gender bias in just our search patterns already right now.
I would love to see the museum community create like an ethics standard around their use of AI. I know other sectors have come together around here are the things that we find ethical, here are the things that are too blurry, a gray area, and a dangerous area. So I think the time is probably now for cultural institutions to make decisions around what we consider, as a body, unified on our position there. I'd love to see that happen.
I was going to add that the statistics around who works in museums, I can't remember, it's 86% or 95%, but even in a city like New York, as diverse as we are, it's something like 86% white. One of the things we're doing at New Ink, and that's very core to our values, is we have an incredibly diverse community. And so as we're designing this technology, everybody says if you want better AI, you want better data, you want better results, you need diverse people who are building the technology. And so, I mentioned earlier, we have 12 people. Those 12 people come from all different kinds of backgrounds, walks of life. There's women, there's men. And I would say that is for museums, if this is a big thing, as we're working on tagging this data, that it's important to have a mixed group of people working on the data sets.
Gosh, no little task and so much to cover in such little time. I guess we've had such an amazing discussion so far about all of the things. Are there any last things that you wanted to say about this space before we close the panel? No.
I feel like we've talked a lot about things that live within the cloud environment or within the remote environment, and I think something that is just so interesting to think about now is where the physical and digital worlds converge and how AI and related technologies can be used to remove friction for the visitor, for the audience, whether it be to make a more contextual experience, a more personalized experience, something that is more relevant to the diversity of people coming through the doors. I think that looking to what happens in the galleries on the floor and how these technologies play a role is something that I love, and I'm so excited to hear about the work of New Ink in that realm, specific to small and mid-sized museums, because I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So
like personalizing your own museum visit and having the most relevant things to you?
Maybe, yeah. There's so many layers to the onion of content and trying to figure out what's right and what is more expansive when it needs to be and more focused when it needs to be. I think that there's a lot to be said.
All right, brilliant. I really enjoyed speaking to all of you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed that.